Jesus said, if you're persecuted, remember I was persecuted. If you suffer and if you're put through pain, remember I did it. I prepared the way for you. As a message of hope, there are several people out there that know better than to obey their country blindly, and that our country was actually founded by people that spoke up, that spoke truth to power lovingly. And I think that our country needs more of those individuals to be able to stand up and lead by example, by loving example, and not back down from their convictions, be they moral, ethical, or religious. My name is Logan Laturi. I was born and raised in Southern California. Got through high school all right. I got into college, but I didn't have a way to pay for it. So when I was invited to an event where an Army recruiter was there, I just started listening to him as he was telling me what would be offered by the Army to pay for college. And eventually that was the main initial reason that I decided to join the Army, and other reasons, of course, were travel and just trying to get out of Orange County for a little while. And I tested high enough to where I could choose pretty much any job I wanted in the Army, and so I looked for the ones that paid the highest. One of the highest paid jobs ended up being a 13 Fox, which is also known as a forward observer or a fire support specialist. And they move with an infantry unit, and when the platoon leader, the infantry platoon leader needs artillery, mortars, naval gun fire, close air support, the forward observer is the one that is a liaison between the infantry and that asset. So I acted as the eyes for those assets. I was in Hawaii for about a year, enjoying the sun and everything else that Hawaii has to offer for about a year and 2 days. I left Hawaii January 19th, 2004, and I spent about 14 months in Iraq in OIF 2. And while I was there, I was a specialist, or an E4 pay grade in the Army. And my job was essentially to, along with the job that I had for being the observer for the artillery, we were also utilized as information specialists. So we were the ones that were given all the pamphlets saying, we're the good guys, these are the bad guys, here's some money to fix your house, those kinds of things. But I did do my real job a few times, several times. And again, that included not too much artillery, but a lot of mortars, a lot of close air support, and a lot of attack helicopters. And we saw a lot of the country. We were in Samarra, Najaf, Diwania, Mosul, Tal Afar, Syrian border. I know I'm forgetting a few of them. And essentially what our job was as a battalion was to respond to high intensity conflicts that they needed light infantry soldiers at as quickly as possible. A good example of what we were utilized as, near the end of the year, we thought we were going to be home by the holidays, and that changed in late October. I was in bed in my in my little Connex, and I think it was at 10 or 11 at night when my supervisor came in and told me to wake up and start packing. And by midnight, we had our trucks loaded up, and we were on our way up to Mosul to provide an additional presence during the election period in January of '05. I think what I made a concerted effort to do was to understand why I was there, why we were there, what we were doing, did I agree with it? And while I was there, I actually read the 9/11 Commission report. I started reading Newsweek a little bit more. I started to try and figure out at least my place in the geopolitical kind of scheme of things going on. And the more I learned, the less complacent and blissfully ignorant I became. And that objective approach to my place in, I guess, reality, I started to learn a lot more about the political structure and the way things work. So I got back, and for a few months I just kind of decompressed. I think we got back in February, mid-February, and in May I met a really great woman. We started dating, and by the end of June or July of that year, I met her parents, and her parents were definitely a little bit different than I expected. The first time I met them, I was at dinner. I went to dinner at their house, and her dad actually said, "You know, I'm going to be honest with you." At that time, my nickname was Lucky, and he said, "Lucky, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really like military guys." And so I kind of held my breath for a minute, like trying to figure out where I was going to go. And he said, "But I think that's a weakness that I have, and I think that that's something that the Lord is calling me to fix about myself. So I'm glad my daughter is dating you." As the time went on, I began to see more and more how both of her parents and a lot of her family really lived the Bible instead of just read about it. And I began to develop my own spiritual kind of journey, and at that time that was really all it was for me. And I started to take a lot of things that I read about in the Bible more seriously because of the example that I had from them. So by January of 2006, I enrolled myself in a New Testament history class. I began to be able to understand the historical validity of the Bible and how it's a recorded document validated by outside sources. So I was trying to figure out, am I a Christian? What does it mean to be a Christian? I've heard all the don'ts. I've heard all the instructions and everything, but what does that mean I am if I am a Christian? Not what I'm not. So I was trying to apply this to my life, and I realized in large part that I wasn't applying it to my profession, which was a large part of my life. It was about 24 hours a day of it. So I particularly started trying to figure out what it meant to be a Christian soldier and what it meant to live a Christian witness inside the army or as a soldier. And I couldn't find a lot of the justification I needed because the large part of my job is destroying as much as possible of whatever I was told to. Human life, personal property, enemy equipment. So I couldn't find it. So I started turning to spiritual mentors. I was asking lay people. I was asking my professor at the New Testament history class. And one thing he taught us before we really got into the whole class, he said, when you turn to the Bible, if you believe that it contains the truth, or that it's divinely inspired and it contains God's word, and that God is basically better than you and is a lot more trustworthy than you might be, then you should allow the Bible to shape your beliefs as opposed to your beliefs shaping the Bible. And by that I think he meant, if I go into it thinking that the world is one way, however I perceive it, and then I read the Bible and shape the Bible to mean what I've already perceived and shaped the world to be, then I'm misinterpreting the Bible because it has a very clear message. And I think when you read it for yourself and you want to really understand what it's really saying, I think it jumps out at you. And it did me. In a nutshell, I don't think that in the post-Messianic period, after Christ has come and given us a new covenant, I don't think that Christians are called to kill anybody at any time under any circumstances. And so that put me in a difficult position in my job because my professional obligations were pretty much to do that. So I was still trying to figure out what this all meant, and I was listening to what a lot of people had said. And a few people, including my girlfriend's father at the time, had said it's the morally right thing to do to go to war and end a dictatorship, or to go to war to get Hitler out of power, and all these other things. But the more and more they were telling me this, the less and less I found it in Scripture. And I was steered towards the just war theory. I read Aquinas, Augustine, Grotius, Luther, Calvin, and the more and more they rationalized the just war theory, the less and less they based it on Scripture, and the less and less they relied on the authority of the Bible. So I began to realize that man's rational mind can be perverted just like everything else has been or can be, and that it must be checked against the authority of the Bible if I'm to trust it, at least personally. So we'd actually gotten our orders to redeploy to Iraq. We were going to be deploying in August of 2006, and I was in this process of trying to figure out what it meant to be a Christian and taking it seriously. And I was pulled between two different masters. There's the way of the sword and the way of death and the way of life, which is the way of truth. And I knew I had to choose one way or another. I felt very strongly that there was an appropriate answer and an inappropriate answer to what I was trying to figure out. In the weeks prior, I had really actually begun to really feel God's presence in my life. I really felt like I'd been forgiven for everything I had done, and everything that I'd felt, and everything that I was guilty of. And I started to really feel renewed. And this was all happening in church. So I was sitting on this bus, and I was thinking about it, not really praying, just kind of thinking, and wondering what might I do? Because I had recently learned about being a conscientious objector, and I wasn't sure that really applied too much to me because I felt called to stay in the military because I think it's a great ministry field. I think a lot of people in the Army would really benefit from a good witness to a Christ that really stands by peace and doesn't waver and doesn't rationalize it into kind of idealism. It was on April 20th at 9:40 in the morning when I was on this bus when I kind of got this vision. I saw a few things just kind of in my imagination, but I got the clear feeling that it was being put there, that it wasn't something that I just kind of slowly thought up. I knew I was in the Middle East, but thinking about it honestly, I wasn't sure it was Iraq. I knew it was the Middle East. I knew I was in an area of great conflict and strife, a warring nation. And the second thing I knew was that I didn't have a weapon in my hand. And despite that, despite being in this conflicted area without any form of defense or offense, I knew I should be afraid, but I wasn't. I knew I was walking in this kind of very brief epiphany. I was walking with a confidence I'd never felt before, an assurity or a certainty that it didn't matter what happened, that I was doing what God was calling me to, and that was all I knew. I was in the Middle East without a weapon. So on June 5th, I put in my formal application to be a conscience objector, and that process lasted just over a month. And in that month, there are two things that are required, among many others, and one of them is a chaplain's interview, who is to determine your depth of sincerity. And right after I turned in my formal application, I went home on leave, and the second night I was home, my girlfriend and I we were having dinner to discuss relationship stuff, and when it got time to be her turn to kind of bring something up, she said, in essence, we left that conversation no longer a couple. And one of the reasons that was given was that we were headed in different spiritual directions. So I got back to the unit, and when I went to see the chaplain, I had all this stuff in my head, and I tried to explain to him why I felt the way I did and what I wanted to do, and how I didn't think the just war theory was justified based on my understanding of the New Testament. And for the first time, at many different discussions I'd had with other military members, for the first time he respectfully disagreed, but he said that he admired my conviction and that he did not doubt that I had a sincere belief that I was ready to go to Iraq no matter what the consequences were, but I would not carry a weapon. So the second interview that is required is a psychiatrist interview, and when I went to see the psychiatrist, I explained real in depth what I hoped to do. I wanted to go to Iraq. I did not want to carry a weapon. I would not carry a weapon, and based on the first 20 or 25 minutes as I was explaining this to him, he told me pretty bluntly that I was probably one of the most mentally stable people he'd ever met with, but because what I had hoped to do, and because of a conflict between my religious convictions and my professional obligations, that it basically, by definition, was it was a failure to adjust to the military standards or my duty in the military. So he recommended, not punitively or derogatorily, he knew that the Army wasn't the best place for me, or that was his diagnosis, that I would not remain fit for duty, and that my goals represented a very real threat to my physical security. That if I saw this through, it would very clearly be a threat to my physical life. I took this back to my unit, who quickly accused me of trying to get out of a deployment. I was told that I lied to the psychiatrist. I was told that I had found a perfect scheme to get out of the military. Can't remember a lot of the other ones. And that my actions benefited the enemies of America. And of course I took that as an affirmation, and I actually left the office with a smile on my face, because Jesus commands us to love our enemies and bless them and pray for them. So as a result of the mental diagnosis, they reassigned me to a unit that would not deploy, which is not what I wanted and not what I expected. I actually did think that I would get to Iraq without a weapon. And so I was struggling with, I thought I was supposed to go to Iraq, I thought I was supposed to do this, and I was kind of settling mentally into this idea of being in Hawaii long-term in garrison while the rest of my unit was deployed. And I knew that I was called to be a missionary. I knew that God wanted me in the Middle East. And I knew I didn't want to wait. Because a verse that kept popping up was, I want to say John 9:60, somewhere where Christ says, "He who places hands on the plowshare and looks back is not worthy of me." So I didn't want to wait. I knew when God calls you, He calls you at that moment, or start acting, not later when it's convenient for me. So I found through a bunch of different people, through Shane Claiborne, Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, a few other people, had gone to Iraq with CPT, Christian Peacemaker teams. And curious, I looked them up, and I was looking for a delegation to Iraq, and they didn't have any more after Tom Fox had been kidnapped and later executed in Iraq. And so I was trying to figure out where God wanted me, and Israel that week that I was looking into CPT began bombing Lebanon. So I figured, why not Israel? So I put in an application for CPT for Israel. I spoke with a few people in the office that were concerned that an active duty soldier may not be the best. They were concerned that there might be a conflict of interest between my professional duties and their mission of a direct nonviolent action. And I explained to her why I wanted to go. I explained to her why I couldn't go to Iraq. After a brief phone conversation, she said, well, put in your application and we'll see you in November. That's the next, that would have been the next available delegation. So hoping that I would go to Israel. I expected to be able to take a 2-week block of leave, go to Israel, come back, and go right back to the active duty army. So I went to my commander, my new commander, and to be granted leave outside the country, you have to have a special request approved. So I asked him what I had to do to get that. And when he asked me where I was going and why, I told him that I wanted to go to Israel, that part of it had to do with their bombing of Lebanon, part of it had to do with me wanting to get back to the Middle East, and also that I wanted to be in Iraq, but it just didn't happen. And he told me that it would not get approved because an American soldier would not be welcome in a combat area on leave. So trying to struggle through figuring out how to get out there or how to fulfill this commission. I never withdrew my application from CPT. I considered changing my request to discharge. I spoke to a new chaplain, and he was guiding me in the right way to do that. And after a few weeks of really struggling with how do I get out there and what did this vision mean if it wasn't me in the Middle East, I got my pay stub for the month of August at the end of the month, and my separation date, which had been bumped back to October of 2007, now reflected November of 2006. So that was pretty surprising, and I went to the proper agencies to figure out whose mistake it was and how to correct it. And the more I asked and the more I tried to just get this kind of one single thing on my to-do list done, the more I asked, the more I realized that it wasn't a mistake and that I needed to get ready to get out of the Army. And it just happened to be 3 days into my hopeful CPT delegation in Israel. So the coincidence of the date was a little too coincidental to excuse as coincidence. So I kind of went on faith that, okay, I guess I'm getting out, I'll start my stuff. My command could still reject it and they could still keep me in. But I did it anyway. So I put in my packet shortly before coming out to Philadelphia to visit with Simple Way and Camden House and Mission Year and all these other things. When I got back from that, I was told the first morning that I came back that you're either deploying or you're getting chaptered out. Basically, you're getting kicked out because of mental disorder. So they asked me once again, you can deploy if you want. I said, of course I want to, but I'm not taking a weapon. They didn't like that too much, so we considered the chapter, and then I realized that the separation paperwork had already been started and could very easily save everybody a lot of paperwork. And so they ended up going with the option of allowing me to separate normally from the Army. So I got out of the Army. I was using my vacation days, and I essentially got out October 19th of 2006, but I was effectively still on active status until November 21st of that same year. And on November 19th, I was in Israel-Palestine on a Christian Peacemaker Team's delegation. One thing that I've found that a lot of people in the Army are very concerned about what's going on. Not necessarily strictly Iraq, but also a lot of people are concerned about Iraq. And their place in it, their role in it. They want to know more about their options, about what can be done, what rights do soldiers have, reservists, active National Guard. And I know of a number of organizations that could help. Among the one that would probably be a good gateway to start with would be to research GI Rights Hotline or objector.org. Another really good one is the Catholic Peace Fellowship. I think that's catholicpeacefellowship.org. They have a really comprehensive site. I used it. I'm not Catholic, but they have an enormous amount of resources, both Catholic and just early church history. They've got a podcast called Warcast on iTunes. You can probably search on iTunes for podcasts called Warcast for Catholics or Catholic Peace Fellowship. If nothing else, you can contact me or objector.org. But the good one to start with is probably GI Rights Hotline. There are a lot out there that don't make it to the headlines. There's plenty of people that I've been in contact with that may never get heard from. I'm surprised that I was heard from. I think the bottom line that service to your country includes recognizing when that country is in need of a moral voice, of a voice rooted in love and peace for not just our own country, and not just our own interests, and not just our own little boxes. I think what our country needs most in times of war are the voices that remind them that we are a moral nation, that we are a peace-loving nation, and that means that we want what's best, not just for ourselves, but for the world. And I think the way to do that is to gently, reverently, lovingly remind our country that there are better ways than war to solve problems, that war needs to be the last resort, that even the just war theory was meant to restrain violence, not to justify violence. Augustine and Aquinas, it was all meant as, these are the guidelines, and this is what makes a war justified. These are the only reason that we can go to war. And in the Catholic peace tradition, it's actually, I don't think any war has ever been justified by the just war theory, ever. In one way or another, we've broken it, and that makes the entire war unjust.